citizen, same vision is for equal rights and justice for the people them. What's happening to this beautiful world that we're living in? World citizen, lift up your voices.
Welcome to another episode of the People-Powered Planet podcast. Each week we have amazing speakers from all over the world who are focusing not on the incredible problems of the world, but on solutions. You can join us each Wednesday, 10 a.m. Pacific, and from around the world to hear solutionaries. And today we have some very special solutionaries. These solutionaries are dealing with the huge problem in the world of statelessness. There are over 50 million stateless people in the world, people who have no identity, either because their countries disappeared, their particular ethnic group was excluded, millions of different reasons, hundreds of different reasons. And the speakers we have today are with us from around the world. They're working on a virtual nation that can issue a digital identity not tied to geography or history or birth. Now, for those of you who've been with us before, you know that our program is built around the ideas of Gary Davis, who was world citizen #1, who started the World Service Authority. And for 66 years, they've been issuing identities, the World Passport. And David is also with us today to learn about some of the new incredible breakthroughs that technology has brought us that can now enhance the power and collaborate with the World Passport to bring an ability to make some significant changes in the world beyond just helping the stateless people, something that can help all of us on planet Earth. Now, to talk about the virtual nation, we have several very important speakers. We have Jan, who is calling in from Holland. And Jan is a futurist, and his specialty has been a focus on the impact of technology on social behavior. And then we also have Brendan DUNPHY, who is an entrepreneur, social entrepreneur, and he's calling in from Nice, France. And then we will start the presentation with Mike NORTHCOTT. Mike NORTHCOTT is the founder of Spearfish Innovation. He was formerly Hewlett-Packard Vice President of Global Operations and Strategy. And he will start off by telling us a little bit more. Tell us, people are so used to thinking that nations and countries have to have a particular geographical boundary or they're not a nation. What is your concept for a virtual nation?
Thanks, Arthur. I think that Jan, Brendan, and I, and another colleague of ours, Brad, have been talking about the idea that the existing idea that a nation has to be tied to territory in this digital age is old thinking, and that the idea of a virtual nation state empowered by technology is eminently doable. It's our belief that the technology is actually available. It hasn't been integrated and put forward in such a way as to provide services comprehensively. But nonetheless, the idea of building a nation state in a digital realm could be a reality and is something that could address the problem of statelessness for millions of people.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're certainly a little example of that here with people. You're in Rome or near Rome, and I understand you're in the middle of a thunderstorm there, so we hope your internet stays strong.
Thank you.
But you've got a nice quiet place anyway. And I see other people joining us here. Barbara Mueller, who's head of the Rotary E-Club of World Peace, and Frank and Richard, and well, so many other people coming in with us, so we appreciate that. To give us a little introduction to the virtual nation, Mike, do you have a few slides to show us that can give us a little brief introduction to the concept, and then we can go into more detail?
I do. Let me start sharing, and let me know when you have that up.
Yes,
how's that looking?
See your screen.
Good. Yeah, so I mean, the problem I think is well understood, but millions of people around the world don't have access to services or are denied basic human rights because of the fact that they are stateless. And being stateless can be a result of, war, poverty, strife. Maybe they're refugees, or potentially they were just never allowed to have citizenship because of where they were born in the country. And for example, in China, if you're in a rural area, you are supposed to have a hukou. And if you're not issued a hukou, you have absolutely no access to any of the sort of fundamentals that you would expect that the Chinese government might provide you. So our thought is that if you could create a virtual nation state where you could issue citizenship, not based on birth, but or history, but based on basic human rights, then you could solve the problem for millions of people and allow them then to start to participate in an economy in ways that they're just not able to do now. Because without an identity, you don't have access to banking, you don't have access to financial services, you don't have access to the fundamentals of what makes an economy work. And in this sense, traditionally nation states have been collections of people who are brought together through cultural cooperation and collaboration. And given the right types of infrastructure, those types of things should continue to exist in the virtual world. And, with the COVID crisis, we've all had this ability to start to collaborate internationally using digital technologies in ways that even 2 years ago people were unfamiliar with. And now we're doing it on a scale that's just completely unprecedented. So we know from direct experience that we can engage people digitally, we can bring them online. And now the next question is, how can you create a state that is actually robust and will start to form the basis for services and participatory citizenship? Real short slide on the kinds of migrations that we're seeing now. So if you think about statelessness, you think about refugees. Well, refugees are actually a fairly small slice. This is all UN data, by the way, of the migrants out there. So people who are actually displaced internationally are about 26 million or so. People who are displaced within their own countries, again, probably double that. And yet you've also got a huge number of people who are economic migrants. And these people are looking for work overseas. And so they'll move from one country to the next and become an economic migrant. And very often for poorer countries, they'll serve as the backbone for those economies as well by sending and repatriating money that they're earning in wealthier countries. The other thing is that, as you think about who these people are, you've got about a 50-50 split of males and females. And the chart on the left just talks about their age distribution. So, the largest bulks being, between 20 and 60 years old, people of working age. But you also have a large number of children and a large number of elderly people who are involved in the migration here. So the proposition then is, people who lack basic human rights are, treated as non-existent. They don't have citizenship in their own countries. They're prevented from enjoying the basic level of human rights as laid out by the United Nations. And a virtual state that would provide citizenship independent of birth, physical location, and values, you could move away from that accident of history and start to create something brand new without the boundaries that exist in existing national territories. And through the use of these digital platforms, which we believe do exist today, you can start to transcend those and serve the needs of the people as opposed to the needs of the territory. And then finally, our challenge is to really ignite interest and encourage people to start experimenting and working with different kinds of digital models to make a virtual state functional and ultimately to make it legitimate and to really extend beyond the very bold experiments that have already happened in this area. Just briefly, the League of Nations defined a state as having 4 characteristics. And so you have to have a population, you have to have a defined territory, you have to have a government, that is legitimate, and you have to have the capacity to enter into relationships with other nations. And again, as you think about the modern era, the only fundamental difference that we're talking about here is that we're going to occupy cyberspace and not a territory. So we're not about to defend land per se. We are going to, though, defend our cyberspace, our territory in cyberspace, very, very aggressively. And so we're not going to get into physical warfare. We're going to get into cyber warfare, but we will work in a defensive manner. And so in this sense, there's, again, really no reason that a virtual state shouldn't exist. As we talked about, as I've mentioned so far, citizenship, providing that means for people to become citizens and then therefore to be able to start to participate in the economy. And then I think as we start to extend that vision, you can talk about services. So the kinds of services that could be delivered by a virtual government include virtual education. Why not? We're doing it now. Virtual healthcare, or providing financial services, and begin the process of bringing people together in such a way as to start to tie these up. And again, these things work in the virtual economy today. We have virtual currencies. We have the means for secure identification of individuals through transactions with things like blockchain. And this ground shift in how people interact and collaborate, again, accelerated by COVID, is a reality, and it's no longer a barrier to adoption in the way that it was maybe 10 or 20 years ago. And ultimately, the goal would be to create something in a virtual state that was big enough that it would become a significant economic model, so that it would become a financial force to be reckoned with. And again, the first step is through this idea of citizen engagement and citizenship. Some of the services that a virtual state might deliver include things that are directly relevant to people at various stages of their life. So, when you're young, you need education, you need good health care, you need nutrition. As you get older, you're looking at your work, financial services, healthcare, legal support, and of course, ongoing educational support. And then as you look towards retirement and older age, again, healthcare is a huge part of that, but also financial and legal support as well. And that's all built on a foundation of a secure identity that is yours. It is a right to privacy in terms of how you interact with the state and you interact with other citizens in the state, and to provide people with dignity and to provide them recognition as citizens so that they can participate fully and be honest, good participants in the economy and the nation. So that's, what we're talking about is a digital toolkit, a citizen toolkit that starts with the identity, but is enabled through the use and adoption of a citizens charter based on the UN, Convention on Human Rights, probably enabled through smartphone technology. So that becomes your gateway, and using some form of digital transaction and probably biometrics, and that becomes the sort of the tool that is both mobile and accessible. And then once you begin to participate, that creates this network and a reinforcing network for collaboration. The question always comes up, what about multiple languages, different cultures? And the reality is today that, through tools like Google Translate or other translation applications, you're at real-time translation between, different cultures. And so the idea of a language barrier or having to create a adoption of Esperanto or something like that really goes away. People can talk in their native languages, they can be in their own cultures, but also continue to interact with citizens anywhere they happen to be through the types of tools that are available now. And then as you sort of become more mature, you can see virtual states, sort of citizen apps, and those can be organically deployed as the demand increases. And eventually, as the state becomes established, you'd want to have sponsors. You'd want to have people who have been citizens and invite new people in, and therefore create a very strong sense of community. And so this toolkit is kind of a reinforcement of the foundational ideas of dignity and basic human rights, and bringing together a functional community in a virtual sense. We do have a website that's virtual-state.org, and there's more information there if people want it.
So the key question I want to ask to some of the other members of your team then here is that, first of all, you know, we're having a worldwide shift in views. It used to be thought that, you know, only nations could issue currency. There's French currency, there's American, you couldn't conceive of anything else. And then now these cyber currencies have come along and of course been first put down, but now, as you're saying, they've become a financial force to reckon with, and then suddenly they start getting recognized. And I think it's the same kind of thing with, you know, with digital identities, that they first be, many people have, for instance, dismissed the world passport, but it's been going for 70, well, almost 70 years. And I think as we move into this digital age, it can take on a much greater power. What are the, and we do have David Gallup with us, who's with the World Service Authority, and when we get to the question period, he'll tell us a little bit more about maybe the history of digital identities, starting with the Nansen passport that was again, a passport and not tied to any specific geographical state. So what are some of the key technologies that you can bring into play that can take something like the world passport, which is currently a, you know, a physical identity, you can take it with you to borders and so on and show it, but what is there that could give this a special digital identity that would give it more power? It seems to me that what people are looking for is something that's authentic, and maybe it has something that ties in with reading your iris or your fingerprint, or something that gives it something that is a secure identity, that everyone knows that if this person says this is who they are, and that's a big concern we have on the internet. You mentioned cyber, people are worried about bots and things being created. How can we actually create some technologies that can actually make a secure identity, so you know that me is me, it's not some bot made up in cyberspace?
Yeah, maybe I'll try and answer that, Arthur. I think the first thing is that, yeah, you know, we all have our traditional kind of passports, or maybe have two of them. In the UK, you can get two passports, so you've got two identities, which is interesting. But there's all sorts of other identities here in France. We have identity via health card, so this gives you access to the French health system, and it has a chip embedded in it, which obviously contains certain data about me. Yeah. So when I go to a doctor or pharmacy, I can put this into a machine and they say, ah, yes, yeah, you are who you say you are, but there's a little photo there as well, just to kind of give a visual check. What's happening is that biometrics, and you mentioned iris recognition, and that is definitely one of the most available kind of biometrics today. So this passport has biometrics. So when I enter the UK, which I can't at the moment because of, you know why, but when I can go through a gate and I can put this, I can literally put this 2 pages into a scanner, and I take off my glasses and I stare into a camera. Yeah, and that will do an iris check, which works probably 80–90% of the time. Sometimes it doesn't. So then you have to kind of go and find someone, tap them on the shoulder and say, the machine won't let me in. The computer says no. Okay. Now that's for a number of reasons, which are interesting. So the technology is not perfect, but that technology has come an awful long way. Obviously, we have biometrics in fingerprints, yeah, which is another kind of very standard sort of technology. And interestingly, refugee agencies, for example, are using these biometrics in connection with just a standard smartphone. So now we can get a reader, yeah, that's attached to a pretty standard smartphone to read a fingerprint, for example, or for the camera to actually look in your eye. And this is used by certain agencies and charities to ensure that the people in the refugee camp, for example, are who they say they are before they get a disbursement of cash, you know, which is often the case, you know, for their daily living. So that, you know, this technology is certainly not perfect, but it's getting cheaper and cheaper year on year, and the applications of it are getting broader and broader. And we think it's at a point, you know, now where it can form the basis to actually 99.99% of the time, it's never 100%, say that, yes, this is Arthur, based on a number of factors, not just one factor, yeah, or maybe multiple kind of factors. The card you carry, the iris, the finger scan, whatever. So that problem, I think, is going to go away, you know, in a reasonable sort of time frame. And I think it's worth kind of saying as well is that our horizons are not just, you know, looking at technology today. You know, we have to look 10 years ahead, and we have to look at some of those curves, and we have to make some assumptions and predictions about what is going to be available then and how we can integrate those technologies to create something that doesn't exist, you know, the virtual state. So we're by no means saying that we think every component of a virtual state exists today, you know, in a reliable form that could create a virtual state today. Certainly not on scale, but on a small scale, yes. Hundreds of people, yes. Maybe a few thousands of people, yes. 10,000s, hundreds of thousands, or millions, no. Yeah, the technology like blockchain is not mature enough and fast enough and cheap enough, yeah, to scale to support a nation state of the size that we would know. But we could support Monaco. So just down the road, we have a nation state of 35,000 people. That's the population of Monaco. It's a small town, yeah. But we could support Monaco today on the sort of technology that exists today. And interestingly, Monaco is itself looking to reinvent itself as a digital virtual state using things like the blockchain, yeah, and actually creating currency, its own currency, not as a rival to the French franc or the euro. French franc doesn't exist anymore, the dollar, but as an alternative currency, yeah, to be used in certain applications within the boundaries of Monaco, for example, and other states are going down that road. So I think it's interesting to see that, you know, nation states are kind of playing around with cyber currency. The biggest cyber currency in the world is the Chinese. The Chinese have recognized that cyber currency is a vehicle of influence, particularly in markets like Africa, where China is playing a long-term game and competing with Europe and the US for influence. And it recognizes that it can probably force some of its people it trades with to use its currency, its cyber currency, as an alternative to the dollar. So, you know, there's a whole bigger battle going on there strategically between China and the US, but cyber currency plays a role in that. And, you know, and we have ambitions for, you know, cyber currency, but not just as a replacement for, you know, the fiat currency we have today, but to have a currency that has value built into it. Yeah. So in other words, it has other facets and assets, yeah, that you can actually build into that currency. But for example, you may do charity work. Yes, if you do charity work in our states, you will get rewarded for that in the sense of tokens related to the currency, which means, yeah, you know, you have a way to sort of value and quantify maybe some of the things that are hard to quantify in current sort of states, you know, like voluntary effort and so on. So, you know, the boundaries here are kind of like, you know, wide open at the moment, but we really want to reinvent currency, not just, you know, not just the state, you know, we want to invent or reinvent value, yeah, in many different ways, and make that much more tangible and tradable.
That's fascinating because that's something that also Gary Davis conceived of over half a century ago, where he issued the kilowatt dollar that was tied to what he said is really the essential all over the world. Essentially, things we move on kilowatts on energy. And that was much more real than gold that sits there and doesn't do anything. Energy serves our lives. And I love your idea of the more charitable things. The more you help others, the more you do that, the more you gain a currency, the more your product serves humanity rather than uses up resources in a negative way, and so on. It gains traction. I think that's a great idea to be further exploring. And I also want to ask Jan, because you're, as a futurist and someone who's looking into the interface of technology and society, some of the things that that Brendan has been mentioning have powerful possibilities, but some are kind of scary. I mean, you mentioned the Chinese digital currencies and others where they're kind of methods of control. It seems to me that what's happening is we currently have a world where there are certain key players of power and money kind of manipulating the lives of the people in the world and gaining more and more power from these technologies. And yet could these very same technologies be the thing that empower people, that we from the bottom up can begin to create interactive ways of governing, putting out funds, you know, doing currencies, of identities that actually are what we're talking about here, the people-powered planet. that we create something that's more ethically desirable for all of us than the scary top-down control. What do you think?
I was thinking about the refugees here in Holland and all over the place, the whole world. But over the last couple of years, I've done some work in guiding people who came from Syria, and followed also how the nation state acts towards refugees. And as you may have heard Angela Merkel saying 5 years ago, "Wir schaffen das," and the fuss that created all over Europe and here in Holland was great. But I also saw that people who enter into the red tape of the refugee camps, not only in Greece, but also here in Western Europe, they're becoming frustrated by the red tape and the chance of being denied access. And those who flee, they lose their identity. And it all starts with identity. And then they become one of those millions who have no access to any service. So without that identity, you can't find a home, you can't open an account, you can't do anything on remittance money, which is very, very important for those people, because those back home are thinking that they've made it in Europe and they want to see some support from those people who are living in the gutters without any identity, but they have to keep the appearance, keeping up appearances, as the film was called, to the people back home. That's very frustrating, and it all starts with, and David knows that much better than we do, because that's the old issue, and that's where the nation state is becoming a blockade. And local politics and European politics, and when we look at the discussions on the border protections, for those who are falling aside, there's no way to, except for entering the illegal environment and criminality and whatsoever.
That certainly touches on issues that the World Service Authority has been dealing with Gary's organization for many years. And I guess I'd like to ask one more question before opening it to questions and bringing David on as well. But that question is, in terms of something like the existing world passport, how can, well, actually I have two more questions. Before I get to the question about the passport, let me ask one other, and that is, there are other people also working on similar areas as that you're doing. Before we go to David, let me talk a little bit about, there's BitNation and others. What is this kind of scope that you've seen of other people working on such concepts as evolving a virtual nation?
Shall I comment on that first?
Yeah, why don't you go ahead, Brendan?
Yeah, there are kind of a lot of initiatives, particularly in terms of like using emerging technologies for example, a digital identity, and obviously using blockchain as a distributed, non-centralized kind of method of transacting. Because the great thing about blockchain is there's no one single authority. There's not a database, sitting there that someone owns and therefore can or could, under certain circumstances, share that data, sell that data, or reveal that data, and so on. And that's one of the problems with things like digital identity. I mean, there's a huge movement for digital identity. ID 2020 is one. And for example, in Africa, there's something called ID for Africa. And they are doing a lot of work about trying to come up with digital identities pretty much country by country. So national governments in Africa are very key to do that. But the problem is they're all centralized. Ultimately, that means that data is going to reside on some database under control of some government, which may be elected and theoretically democratic, but who knows where that's going to go in the medium term, or even the short term. So there are sort of big dangers around digital identity, because it's very much being implemented under the existing kind of structures, and the weaknesses of those structures and dangers of those structures really risk exposing people with digital identities to more issues and problems. If you really want to be able to identify a minority in India, it's very easy now because pretty much all Indians have a digital identity. So you can be excluded, and they know exactly who to exclude, because of digital identity. So the problems kind of here are growing potentially, given the sort of infrastructures and technologies that are being used. But you're right, there are lots of the UN and relief agencies, for example, charities are all doing things around identity itself, trying to find mechanisms to share and bring people together, in the sense of like communities and creating communities so they can be self-supporting. So, and there are literally hundreds of digital IDs already. And, really, I mean, David will talk about this, but he could reach out to one of these organizations that has digital IDs. If he's done the front end work in sort of validating who these people are, then they could be given a digital ID that would exist as an app on their smartphone, for example, and would be not a replacement for the passport, but actually work as a sort of digital version, in inverted commas, of the passport to provide access to services that the passport can't probably provide today, because that's essentially a travel document, or a form of identity. So yes, there are definitely things around there, and we're about using those things. So we're reaching out all the time to try and find these other sort of projects and coalesce them. So the idea is to try and bring these things in together and to sort of help refocus them, shall we say, on our particular sort of vision, rather than maybe just what they're kind of working on, at the moment.
Well, I'm so glad you're working to coalesce them and bring them together. That's really important. So are you saying that, for example, if you were collaborating with the World Service Authority, you could provide a way that this world passport would be not only something you could physically carry, but would actually be in your smartphone as well, and would have this tie-in with, say, fingerprint or iris and so on, to be something that you could show at borders and would be, or using to get into a bank, or to get your kids into school, or to get your kids medical care, that it could be something that had a telephone component tied in with it, and that you might have technology to be able to help and work with David to do something like that?
Yes, in principle, yes. I mean, we don't build those things ourselves. We're not about creating, but what we're saying is that there are technical organizations and people who already have those things, so we could help sort of facilitate that, and work for that. And I think the important thing is that if David's kind of citizens had a digital ID, very importantly, they could collaborate with each other. It would be a mechanism online, just as now, and in social media, for those people to come together in different, interesting, novel ways, not just for social and entertainment, but also to support each other, to maybe create businesses, to sort of trade, to educate. So you would have a virtual platform to get a lot more interaction potentially between those citizens, shall we say.
Building on a couple of things that Brendan said, I think one of the other things that is important about digital technologies, particularly if you're employing something like blockchain, is transparency. And so you can deploy these things in a way that puts the data in the hands of the citizen. And that's perhaps scary for centralized governments, but you can always go through a blockchain and understand who's done a transaction on your passport. And in this way, if you've been prevented from participating in some benefit from the government, you can see if somebody's put a stop on that. So the idea of having transparency in terms of transactions, anytime you've had some use of your identity, and leaving that power, leaving that information in the hands of the citizen is very empowering.
Very good. Well, I do want to bring on David Gallup. David Gallup worked with Gary Davis for years to create work with and to carry out the work of the World Service Authority, issuing identities to stateless people around the world, but to anyone who wants to identify themselves as a world citizen above these borders that divide us. David, can you come on and tell us a little bit more about what you see as the opportunities for moving forward from the existing world passport to joining into this digital age for the bottom-up rather than top-down way of empowering people through this technology rather than control?
Sure. Well, one thing I'd like to start with is I'd love to see us build a coalition of individuals and organizations that support world identity or digital world identity, or both, linking both together. So I'd love to see us work together, first of all, rather than separately. And I'm already working on another coalition towards World Federation. And I know one of the things you said is that you don't see the virtual nation state trying to dissolve nation states. Well, Gary Davis's idea of creating a world citizen government and providing everybody with world citizenship identification was never to dissolve the nation state. In fact, it was to protect those allegiances, but to move beyond them so that we could work and live together peacefully with justice for everyone on the planet. I can tell you already, World Service Authority has, you might say, done a test run of several different passports where we have embedded on the affiliation page. There are 2 affiliation pages in the World Passport, pages 6 and 7. We've embedded a QR code, and that QR code also had below it a blockchain record. So if you took a mobile phone and scanned it, it would take you to that particular person's online digital cryptocurrency account, as well as their blockchain record that may detail other personal data that they might want to share or might not want to share, depending upon who the person was, or how they may have been interacting with some other individuals, organizations, or government officials. It might have personal data, biometric data, if they wanted it to. So we've actually used that, the passport already, as a form of link between a physical and a virtual identity. And I would love to see us take that idea even more forward and have on someone's mobile phone not only the sort of a recreation of the World Passport, but also people to have the backup of the physical one if they want or need it. I mean, questions come to mind that what would happen if there were some sun flare or something that caused satellites to go out, or caused mobile phone service to be out. If you couldn't really show your phone, then where's your what happens to your identity? So that's something that comes to mind. And also, I guess, maybe to expand what we're talking about, and I know we're running out of time here, but just to think about, I know you said in your presentation, Mike, serving the needs of people, but I think what also needs to be injected into the virtual state idea, virtual nation, is serving the needs of the planet. And the environment, and injecting ideas of peace and justice within a virtual state. And I think it is already there, because you've talked about how we're going to help refugees and help the 1 billion people who are undocumented and sort of bring them into the economy. But then we also have to think about how will that impact the world environmentally. So anyway, there's so many issues that are linked to both government and individual identity that we can't handle them all in 1 hour. But anyway, my point is we need to collaborate, and I'd love to see us work together like I'm doing with another group of a whole bunch of different organizations that are promoting World Federation and world citizenship at the same time, but that have never worked together in the past, but are now realizing that we have to, if we're going to have a world that will survive another millennia.
David, your experience for the last 66, 70 years is just vital to anything going forward, because you know where all the landmines are in dealing with nation states and the kinds of things that they do, and that kind of knowledge just can't be replicated. I mean, there's just, you have to bring that forward. And now the question is, what's the new model as well? Yeah,
definitely, I agree. Yeah.
All right, well, I understand we have some questions lined up, and Melanie Bennett, who's a co-producer with me of the whole program here and a producer on the film, The World is My Country, will now take some questions.
Thank you, Arthur. And thank you, everyone. This is fascinating. And I'm so glad we're working together, and we have other people who are interested and are working on this project that would like to ask some questions. And the first person we'd like to go to is Jane. Jane, if you could unmute, please.
Yes, thank you. So this is a very cool idea for providing identity, for enabling participation in financial things. But of course, traditional states provide many services that are inherently physical. You can't give someone an injection virtually. You can't do surgery virtually. So have you thought about maybe having this virtual state have essentially treaties or something with physical states where, no, okay, you provide these services to our citizens and we give you X amount of money each year or something.
Great question. So having treaties with actual, physical states to provide things like surgery or things like that. Have you thought of that? Who wants to field that question?
I'll start and then maybe Jan, Brenda can jump in, but yes, absolutely. I think that question of the physical virtual interface is something that will have to be carefully thought out over time, but there's absolutely no reason that a virtual state can't behave as an arbitrage to service providers that are, doctors working locally, whether it's in a different state or in a different country. And therefore, through the power of its ability to connect people to services, actually do a better job in, for example, insurance. So you can aggregate insurance and therefore spread the risk around. So I think that, the question of what's the last mile of any service is absolutely critical, but there are functions that the state can provide that don't necessarily impact the functioning of healthy markets as well.
Good, I think that covered it. Thank you so much. And now we'd like to go to Michael Walsh. Michael, if you could ask your question.
Hello, everybody. I'm really glad to be here. It's very exciting because I work in the same space, my startup globalcitizen.one. So my first question is, are you, Mike, and are you connected with Mariana Dehan of the World Identity Network? And second part of the question, sorry, is are you familiar with holochain technology, which seems to fit the bill as far as being totally distributed, peer-to-peer, very robust, independent nodes, secure with their own data storage?
The answer to the first question is no, but we would love to get some more information about that. And Brendan, the technical question is the holochain. I'm not familiar with it, but Brendan, you may have heard of it.
Yeah, heard of it, yes, but I'll be honest with you, not really sort of looked at it in any detail. So yeah, I think certainly should take that sort of, take that.
Yeah, I encourage you to look into it. You'll be really interested. You can read the white paper, the green paper on it, and it's very illuminating.
Excellent, thank you for that.
Well, this is bringing people together who can stay in touch after the meetings. Excellent.
Oh, and I had one more quick thing. David has a working group which convenes on Thursdays, and I think they're off this week. And if David, if you could invite everyone who is interested in joining that working group you were talking about, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, I'll put a link to the coalition working group for World Federation. Yes, in the
awesome.
Chat.
Wonderful. Thank you, David. And thank you, Michael. And now we'd like to go to Barbara. Barbara, your question, please.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. This is really a pathway to peace. That's what I like about having global citizens, because we become one nation because we all believe in one thing, peace. Peace is possible with all of us. And my late husband's working at the United Nations for 40 years, robertmueller.org, always said that peace begins with us beginning to get rid of our borders, because the borders are the reasons why we may not have peace. It's not fighting for what we don't want, it's fighting for what we want. And so I just want to honor you and tell you thank you, because I have created a charter for peace, and everything you're saying today matches what I put in my charter for peace. We can encourage and express goodwill, love, believe that concept, and begin naming and appreciating the signs of peace everywhere. That's what global citizenship does. I have a global passport. My husband and I both had one, and we can seek out those who are believing the same thing we believe on a virtual community. And so I want to honor you, and if there's anything I can do to help you, let me know. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful. And Barbara, do you want to go ahead and put a link in the chat? That'd be great. So everybody's connecting. Wonderful. Okay. Now we have Claire. Claire, if you could go ahead.
I was just thinking, if a person, it is bottom up, a person can choose their identity. What would happen if a person wanted to change their identity and to escape the past?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, it happens now, of course, yeah. And it's interesting that, many refugees, for example, try and hide their identity because they're the victims of, something in their country. The last thing they want to be is to use their kind of actual name. And this is, refugee agencies and others struggle to actually find out often who people are, because they're very reluctant to reveal who they are, because there's maybe a lack of trust, with that agency and so on. And so some are doing that in a negative way, maybe fleeing their past, just as people would join the French Foreign Legion, for example, to flee their past, and still do, and you probably change their identity. And others do it for very legitimate reasons, that they're living in fear of persecution and being tracked down. It's quite interesting in today's age. Many people, any Chinese people, for example, in the UK and elsewhere, live in fear of the Chinese state. Because even though they're in the UK, they know the reach of the Chinese state is very significant, and that whatever they say or do on social media and elsewhere, is being gathered and could be used against them. So I think it's a very interesting area, this one, a very sort of double-sided thing. Yes, people could lie about their identity and misuse it, but there are legitimate reasons as well for changing or hiding your identity. So I don't have the answer, but I think it's a fascinating challenge.
Well, and I think that the question of the state's role in both managing, both giving and rescinding identity is important, and it has to be thought out. And so that question of being the policeman or police person is going to be a very important part of this. And the question of participating in the society and adhering to the values and the rules of that society are also a critical part of the evolution of this idea.
Wonderful. Goodness sakes. Excellent questions. We have a lot of great people asking, and it's very informative. I think we might be done with questions. Last chance for a question. I see someone who I'd like to have ask a question, but hasn't already. All right, well then we will go back to discussion, and Arthur, thank you. Take it away.
I noticed that we have on the call Rufo, who is going to be joining us as our next week podcast. And he is he was formerly started an e-voting democracy startup, participatory technologies. He's been working in this area of digital identity and how do we have a secure identity for a long time. He even has a thing called trustless AI, which means that how do we have something where you don't have to just trust that this person says they are, you can actually verify it. You can actually have verifiable ways of interacting. And I'm wondering, are you interested in asking a question now? And this, I know you'll be talking next week, but Rufo, if you're available.
Yes, I'm here. I'm sorry, my video is not available now, but thank you for the introduction, Arthur. And yes, I take those opportunities to ask a question. In addition to having digital means to state your global citizenship, some kind of a global digital identity, it seems to me that it would be crucial. I mean, that's already a very challenging task, but technologies are there. But it seems to me that we would also need some kind of communication infrastructure so that these global citizens could effectively practice their citizenship, at least among themselves, to communicate, practice their freedom of association and freedom of talking and deciding and voting together, organizing, and so on. So there are applications like Signal, good application, which are encrypted. And so I was wondering if you are conceiving that as well as part of the virtual nation.
Yeah, if I just answer that one, I mean, most definitely. And I think this, it's probably easier to see that there are certain services that would be generically interested to people, whether it's education or health and, economics and so on. But essentially this would be a digital platform for communication. So whether you use Signal or whether you use Telegram or anything else, that those things kind of out there, and there are open source equivalents for people to come together. And there's also a lot of, in Barcelona and Amsterdam, in Europe generally, there's been a lot of kind of interesting work on participative democracy. Barcelona is a very good example of that, but there are others. Turin in Italy, for example, is quite good at at that. So I think in many ways what we'd be doing also is trying to take some of those things and bring those sort of concepts and tools, yeah, to the virtual state as a way to engage people more directly in decision making and responsibility for their lives, world, planet, and environment as well. Yeah. So definitely those collaborative tools, because this essentially would be a collaborative state where we're coming together to solve problems and so on, are fundamental. Yeah. And they need to be secure and accessible, you know, from a mobile phone, for example, you know, those sorts of things.
Yes, coming together to solve problems is actually key to what Gary and I would talk about when we discuss the people-powered planet concept. And Gary always said, you know, government should be a service, like the International Postal Union or ICANN that regulates all the, it's a nonprofit organization that regulates our internet site. So nobody has the same URL, no one has the same email. And that governing process that happens doesn't require anybody over us. We don't even have to know who is head of it. It's something from the bottom up that interactively governs and has teeth, has impact. The key, he always said, is the tool makers. Bucky Fuller would talk about that when we create a new tool, it becomes so valuable to people that doesn't matter whether they're for or against it, they do it. You know, the automakers, inventors of the automobile didn't have to argue against horse and buggies. You know, they just created a new tool and it took off. And how can we be the creators of a tool that's so valuable to people in terms of interaction and getting the services and things they need, that they are gravitated toward world citizenship, not because they're giving up on states, but because this is something more valuable they want to reach out to and embrace. Any ideas on that?
I think you're absolutely right. And I think you know, the identity of the virtual state and the attraction of the virtual state is these kind of things we're talking about, is that people would say, yeah, I want to be a part of that because I believe in this, in what you're trying to do, and I've got ideas, or I can help solve these problems, or I can, you know. So I think, you know, the challenge is to sort of create something that's people can instantly kind of, yeah, recognize and gravitate towards and want to be, you know, a part of that. Yeah. A very kind of active, engaging kind of, state.
Well, I think solving problems is really key. You know, when you think about it, there was a tool maker a long time ago who helped move us forward in terms of the whole discord of groups getting together, and brought us into developing like parliamentary systems and other systems. It's systems and tool makers that help bring us together to create the changes that happen in the world. When you trace change throughout history, it's always new tool makers that have opened those doors. So thank you for being part of creating these tools. And can you tell us a little bit more about what are some of the key ways you see this tool as being a service in someone's daily life, in their everyday life?
For example, we've talked about refugees, and so each refugee camp has a microeconomy of its own. Now, if you are in a camp and you want access to capital, say you want to buy a new cell phone so that you can do phone sharing, minute sharing, and allow others to call home or something like this, you know, not having access to the banking system makes it very, very challenging. But as a virtual state, what you could do is bring together people who are interested in supporting refugees in camps, provide them the means for putting the capital up front, and then another means for that to be converted into value at the site where it's going to be most useful. And again, so the role of the state is not to necessarily dictate or get into the details of what happens on a day-to-day basis with the transactions. It's really to enable those transactions to come together, to bring people together and make the world a better place.
Right.
I think that just to add to that, I mean, crowdfunding we're all aware of, yeah, you
Yeah.
can put a project up or whatever. So there are tools like that. So we have a buddy kind of concept, and the idea is that maybe someone, let's say in the West, in America, whatever, could actually adopt someone in a refugee camp, and they would provide, let's say, the smartphone. I mean, a very basic smartphone now is $25, $50 kind of thing, that sort of range. And that would give them then the platform with some internet access, yeah, which again, could be paid for by the buddy, and to actually kind of get them going, shall we say, yeah. And obviously that would create a relationship across boundaries between kind of geographies and nations as well, which is interesting, I think, the West and whatever. So we're looking at ways to sort of facilitate, a sort of a micro level to help get this thing off the ground, but also force to some degree that sort of, that sort of coming together across sort of boundaries.
Right. Well, that's very good. We also have a question from John Hegarty. If you briefly want to ask it, John.
Can you hear me?
Down in Australia. John's down in Australia.
Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, right. Look, I've had some technical problems, but I just want to know how close are we to universal access to the internet? At one stage, I thought there were satellites across the world where anyone with the necessary reception could get it. But I don't think that's possible now, or can you tell me?
No, it's not possible. I mean, satellite access does exist, but it's very expensive because of the devices. Yeah, this is the big problem with this technology. They tend to be, you need a lot more power, for example. Yeah, so you end up with expensive devices. And in our thing, it's interesting now in India, for example, Google entered that market. It's working with the biggest mobile network provider now in Indian government to try and get smartphones down to $10. So I think what's going to happen is that devices won't be the problem. The problem is the one you say, in the sense of having internet access. You may have a device, but if you can't connect to the internet at a reasonable price, then you've got a problem. Yeah, there are lots of initiatives around that. I mean, Google and Facebook and mobile phone operators like MTN out of South Africa are doing a lot to bring lower cost internet access to rural areas. So that's starting to develop. And I think, again, looking 10 years ahead, I think a lot of those patches that don't have, internet access in places like Africa will have it, not as fast as you or I have, yeah, and probably not as cheap as you or I have. So there are definitely issues around that, but we are starting to see, yeah, the technology is reducing price to be able to, fill some of those gaps. But it's going to be 10 years, 15 years away before everyone has access.
Can I add just a comment? The group that I volunteer for, World Citizens Association Australia, are sending right now 20,000 books, and most of my teaching aids from a career in education to Bangladesh. But it's really quite costly, the storage and transport. But to me, it's always been, if we can do it, one computer can replace unbelievable amounts. Anyway, thanks very much for the update.
Yeah, thank you.
Can I add one quick thing, Melanie? Sorry.
Sure, go ahead.
It would be important to add to that list the Starlink system by SpaceX, which is now in trials to have a system of global internet access. And whether or not they're going to have lower cost or free internet for certain areas is a great question, but they have a huge number of satellites out there, so many that the astronomers are complaining that they're too bright and they're obscuring. It is a phenomenon. So Starlink is what it's called.
Still it's not enough, but.
Thank you, Michael. And late breaking questions coming in. So we have David Gallup. We'll go to you real quick. David, take it away.
So, yeah, well, I mean, Gary Davis's whole thought is if we all see ourselves as world citizens and have rights and duties as world citizens, no matter where we are on the planet, we can live, we can work, we can interact, we can vote. It doesn't matter where you were born. We're all born on planet Earth. And just because you have any citizenship, whether it's a virtual one or a national one, if the waters rise so much that you can't use your phone because it got wet or because you're underwater, you're going to have to go someplace else. And will that other part of the world take you in and welcome you? If we all see ourselves as world citizens, then maybe so. So I think we need to inject, and I'm always saying this, whether it's the group of people with World Federation that I'm dealing with or anyone, that we need to think about how we can see ourselves as world citizens to then protect our other allegiances that we might have. But to go to that level first, and that has to be injected in all the work that we're doing.
Yeah.
That will deal with refugees and stateless situated. If we're all world citizens, there would no longer be statelessness. There would no longer be refugees. Wherever we find ourselves, we would have our full panoply of rights respected.
Yeah.
Any response to that?
I just say is that, you know, we've probably kind of made it clear up front that the Universal Charter of Human Rights is our starting point. Yeah, and I know that that's kind of one set. I'm not saying that's kind of everything. Yeah, but nevertheless, it's a pretty important fundamental thing. Yeah, to have embedded in you. Because even today, I mean, there are too many nation states that do not have that embedded into their constitution, or if they do not actually honor that charter. Yeah, so I think, you know, building that in again in terms of the fabric of it, rather than just something pasted on, which is often the way it is today, is important. Yeah, because it's back to values. Yeah, and we can build values into that and respect to those values and reward people and acknowledge people for manifesting those values. So it's not just a charter stuck on the wall. It's a part of the fabric of the state from the beginning. And I think that's the difference and the opportunity. Huh?
Can I end up some before it's closing time, I guess, Melanie? But the discussion, I think it was Rufo who started it on not only the virtual state, but also the collaborative state. We are, as we speak, we're forming with all the other initiatives all together is a very nice example of how this could further evolve. It's not new, but the challenges are there and we're accelerating in the possibilities. So I hope that it is not one person or one organization who can take the lead, but why not become a virtual state as we speak?
Yeah. Any other comments from the group? Okay, yes, so working together is key. These ideas are phenomenal. Jane just had a little quick thing. It seems like the big thing is preventing governments from cutting off internet access. So let's add that to the mix, because just like David said, if you're underwater, how would your phone work? So yeah, lots more coming in, and I hope everyone is here next week. But in the meantime, let me pass it back to Arthur. Back to you, Arthur.
Well, this is very exciting because this is exactly the purpose of creating this People Powered Planet podcast, to start bringing people together to collaborate, to actually create this People Powered Planet, to imagineer the kind of future we want, and then to start bringing it into reality. So thank you so much for joining us this week and next week to hear Rufo continuing the similar same discussion as we've mentioned. I also want to take a special occasion to tell everybody that we've got a very special event going on right now. We have our film, The World is My Country, which helps, of course, create this whole concept of an identity beyond the states that divide us. It's going to be on public broadcasting stations across the country. And there are a lot of costs involved in doing that, in terms of both, we have a station relations manager who's going to be calling all the different stations to make sure they pick it up from the satellite feed. We have promotion to work on social media and so on. So we'd love to have people help us with that. But particularly, we'd love to have people help us with with being part of a GoFundMe we're doing right now to raise funds to do this. We're doing it in collaboration with Rotary, because we had on our podcast the president-elect of Rotary International for the whole world. This is a major worldwide organization of people doing good around the world, and a great network to collaborate with as we begin to put together the different collaborations for building the people-powered planet. So please do go to the worldismycountry.com/Rotary, and there you'll see the GoFundMe, or also go to worldismycountry.com/public-TV, and both of those will take you to where you can help be a part of this effort, and where you can help join us in building the people-powered planet. So thank you so much, everyone. Look forward to having you join us again next week. Before we leave, if one of you has one last closing thought, you can have the final word, and then we will go ahead and end it. And thank everyone for being a part of this. Mike or Brendan or anyone, a final word?
Yeah, I think that this has been a fabulous opportunity for us. And I think that the idea that this could come together by one small group of 4 guys working in Europe and in America is just not going to happen. It has to be done through collaboration. It has to be done through the work of like-minded people. And together we can change the world.
And of course, Brad is the 4th member who wasn't with us today, but fortunately all of you, including Brad, can go to the People-Powered Planet and see the replay. Brad is in Boston, so you have people all over the world that are part of your team. Join us, hear the replay, and come back every week. Go down to the bottom of the page of the People-Powered Planet, and you can sign up to be in our club, so you get notices and are part of building all this, or even just to sign up there to make sure you'll get all the notices of club meetings with the Try It Out. Thank you, everybody. Join us next week, and may all of you have a wonderful week as we work together to build the world we choose. Thank you.
World citizen, lift up your voices. Oh, you know we got something to say. All we need is the same directions, heading in one way.